On your Tuesday episode of Locked On Raptors, it's a pivotal offseason for your Toronto Raptors full of many crucial questions. We dig into the three most important of those questions coming up.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, April the 16th. I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 10 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on the Garbage website at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors. And of course, you can join us over on Discord, baby. The link is in the description of the podcast. Come hang out in our little listener family, talking all sorts of off-season machinations, fake trades, fake trade targets, and of course, the Jakob Poeltl trade, which will forever be a topic of discussion in there until I institute some kind of ban on it, which I'm getting dangerously close to. Either way, come join us in the Discord. It's a great little community we got building around the show. We'd love to see you there, and it's free to join. Again, link in the description of the podcast. Of course, you can find the show for free wherever you get your podcasts on the audio app of your choosing. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, etc., etc. Tell a friend. Word of mouth, still a big way to spread the good word about podcasts, so go do that. Tell your friends, and of course, we are on YouTube as well. You can go and subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the notification bell, and get a heads up via push notification every single time the show is about to premiere or go live, and that is a wonderful thing, and supporting the show is a wonderful thing. Thanks to all of you who do it. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I'll admit it, I've got a competitive side, and it's a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. All right. On today's show, we're digging into the three biggest questions facing the Toronto Raptors, and most notably the Toronto Raptors front office going into a very important offseason. We talked on yesterday's show with Vivek Jacob talking about the postseason availabilities for players, about how it does feel like this is kind of a time to turn the page and look forward to good times ahead, but it does require the front office to thread the needle this offseason and get it done right. And how that happens, I think there's lots of different avenues they can take there. We'll examine some of those avenues on today's episode. But first, just before we dive into the big questions, I just want to comment on a thing that is not a big question for the Raptors. And I find it very refreshing that it is not. And it is not, oh my God, are the best players on the team going to be on the team for a long time? It's not, pondering the free agent futures of pending UFAs or soon to be pending UFAs. And that is just a nice place to be. It's been a long run, even going back to during the height of the Kyle DeMar era. Kyle flirted with leaving a few times. DeMar flirted with leaving one time. Never really seemed like he would, but that was a thing. Remember when DeMar was going to the Lakers for the entire 2016 season? That was fun. Of course, Kawhi Leonard. You got Marc Gasol, Serge Ibaka. You got Kyle Lowry again. You got Fred VanVleet, OG, Pascal. It's very nice to not be sitting here fretting losing important players for nothing in the offseason. And, a nice thing is it feels as though this is the summer where they lock in their core long-term, right? I don't think Scotty Barnes' extension is one of the big questions facing the team this offseason. They're just going to give him the max extension, and that's awesome. Emmanuel Quickley, yeah, you can quibble about how much you think he should be paid or whatever, but he's probably going to make a contract that looks very nice on the books, and he's a very good player. Seems to have a lot left to give as well, and I think that's going to get sorted out pretty copacetically based on Emmanuel Quickley's comments yesterday. Doesn't seem like there's any itching to go move somewhere else, and the Raptors have every incentive in the world to keep him around, as they should and probably will. So that's nice. The big contractual stuff, we'll get to some free agents when we talk about Bruce Brown and Gary Trent Jr. coming up, but the sort of big question of will the core players even be the core players going forward, that has been a big question for the Raptors for many years, is not a thing. And that is very refreshing. Of course, the biggest question for this offseason, and it's one that we don't even really have an answer to yet, or we're not going to have one until May the 12th when the lottery goes down, is what the hell is going to happen with the Raptors pick? A lot is going to flow out of whatever happens with the Raptors pick on May the 12th. Of course, a reminder, the Toronto Raptors owe a top 6 protected first-round pick to the San Antonio Spurs for the Jakob Poeltl trade. And, whether they end up picking 6th or 7th in this year's lottery is going to A, determine whether they keep their pick, and B, I think it's going to impact a lot of their subsequent decision making, whether they convey it or not. A reminder of the numbers at play here: 46% chance the Raptors keep their pick as of right now. They're in the 6th slot in the lottery odds. There's a 54% chance they get jumped by a team below them and get knocked down and give the Spurs over the 7th pick. 37% chance of jumping into the top 4, which, I've made my points, I think, pretty clear on this. I'm perfectly happy if they convey the pick for all it clears up going forward. If they jump into the top 4, hey, that's pretty sweet. You take your pick of the guys who are there, even though it's not exactly a stacked or loaded draft at the top. You get your pick of your favorites of the bunch, Alex Sarr, Zachary Risache, whoever's there. You get to pick the better guys in the field. That's cool. You'll take that if that happens and worry about the pick next season. Although, again, I still think it's a pretty good thing if the Raptors convey it. We'll get into some of the reasons coming up today. The number one thing, not maybe number one, but a big part of the sort of offseason plans that's tied to the draft pick situation is the cap space route that's been kind of floated out there as a way for the Raptors to go and add talent this summer. Of course, after signing Kelly Olynyk, the cap space they can get to is a little bit lesser than what it was going to be before that deal. I think you happily signed that Olynyk deal, though, and you're not too upset about it. Our pal Daniel Hackett has the Raptors at about $28 million in cap space if they decline Bruce Brown's option, if they renounce Gary Trent Jr.'s bird rights, if they hold off on giving quickly his extension until after all of their offseason dealings are done to keep his small cap hold on the books. And then from there, if they convey the pick, that will get them to the $28 million or so. The 6th pick is going to have about a $6 million a year starting salary. So if they keep the pick already, your cap space is going down to about $22 million or so via our pal Daniel Hackett. It's worth noting Bobby Marks has the Raptors at about $32 million when it comes to their available cap space. Bobby Marks knows what he's doing. I tend to kind of lean towards Daniel Hackett from Raptors HQ just because he is very, very, very good at this stuff, and he's never led me astray with his cap projections. But somewhere between 28 and 32 is kind of the top end you can get to if you're the Raptors this summer. So not a max slot. They're not going to go pursue Paul George if he's a free agent or anything like that, but they have some money to play with. So with that, again, if they jump up further in the lottery into the top 4, that is going to hurt their cap space even more. It's going to take between 8 and 11 and a half, almost 12 million out of the equation, depending on where that pick falls. Of course, the highest picks in the first round get a set salary, and everyone else has a lower amount, sort of in a descending manner from there. So the real question again is like, if you do keep the cap space avenue open, if you do move on from Bruce Brown and Gary Trent Jr., if you do convey the pick, keep the pick, convey it and don't add that money to the books this summer, what do you do with that? And that, I think, is where the cap space question becomes really fascinating. I just don't, we'll get into that coming up. I'm not sure there's a great avenue to, go and travel with that because of the free agent class you're talking about. The other element of the pick situation is how it affects next season, right? If they convey the pick, my hunch is they're going to go into the season kind of at ease, not worry. Okay, picks out the door, everything's fresh. We can worry about this season. They'll probably go in trying to be competitive, as this front office typically says they want to do, but they will have that sort of escape hatch in a really good draft and not have to worry about conveying the 7th overall pick to the Spurs in a very good draft if they really want to kind of close the season the way they did this year and just kind of lose out. I hope they don't do that because it sucks and it's miserable and it's non-competitive, but that'll be an option for them. That said, I do think it's just kind of a freeing thing. They can just go into next season, not worry about the pick implications, and just play basketball, try to be competitive, get whatever pick they get, and go forward from there. If they convey the pick, you're just not sweating things a year from now. And I think that's a really valuable thing. If they keep the pick, the combination of having 3 incoming rookies, the lessened cap flexibility they have from that, it could limit their ability to make offseason adds, right? It'll limit their cap space. They won't be able to go at the top of the free agent market if that's something they want to do. It also could open up the possibility that they just try to punt on next season entirely and be one of the worst 5 teams in the NBA to guarantee themselves keeping the pick again in a draft that is supposed to be quite good. Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I don't want to see them do that. I don't think it's necessary for them to do that. But if they, keep the pick, that becomes possible. If you're playing 3 rookies or at least 2 rookies and they're getting regular time, and you've moved on from Bruce Brown or Gary Trent Jr. or both, you're looking at a team that's probably going to lose a lot of games and have growing pains. And again, there will be that escape hatch to try and tank down. And this time, like, they'll try really hard to tank down to keep the pick in the top 6 so they don't convey that to the Spurs. So I do think, like, if you're looking for competitive basketball next season, it's more likely that if they convey the pick this year, they go into next year kind of free and easy to go and compete as well as they want to, and not sort of tank it away. But again, it's it's all amorphous. Things change, injuries happen, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, the other thing too is if they keep the pick this summer, all of their trade flexibility in the future gets a little bit more muddy too, because their picks will still be encumbered due to the Stepien rule, where you can't trade picks in back-to-back years or first-round picks in back-to-back years. And so 2025 will be, if they keep it, 2025 will be encumbered. Then 2027 will be encumbered as a result of 2025 being encumbered, and so on and so forth every other year for eternity. That's just going to limit their ability to jump into trade talks and things like that, which we'll talk about trade talks and potential swings they could make later on in the show as well. But that's the kind of rundown on the pick, right? I've made my points clear. I think that they should want the pick to convey. I think tanking down to the 6th spot was a mistake. I think in the long run, it's better for the health of the franchise, considering the lack of strength of this year's draft and the high-end strength of next year's draft, according to everyone who covers this professionally. I think it's best for the short-term pain of not keeping the pick this year, giving it over to the Spurs and having a clean slate going into the summer. But, reasonable people can disagree on that, and that's fine as well. But that's the pick question, and that is the single biggest question right now for the next month or so, until we get a view of what the Raptors' plans and what they're actually working with when it comes to the draft and all their capital and things like that. So that's it. Number 2, we're going to get into the 2 big pending free agents, not, massive foundational free agents or anything like that, but Gary Trent Jr., Bruce Brown. We'll get into those guys and their futures coming up in just one sec. Today's show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off of our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you, and it's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. Maybe you have a relationship that needs some TLC in your life. Maybe you have a career decision you're staring down, a big pivot in your life direction that you need to sort of sort through to make sure you're making the right decision for you. A therapist can help you with that and be there to help guide you and inform you and sort of help you make decisions in line with your values so you can be happy, which is really what we're all after here, is it not? Therapy can be different for everyone. Most people have bigger problems than your favorite sports team, and it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule, and you can even switch therapists anytime for no additional charge if the fit isn't right with who you get paired with first. Again, entirely online, super easy, super flexible. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA for $10 off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Back at it here, digging into the biggest offseason questions facing your recently eliminated, season over Toronto Raptors, heading into the offseason with a 25-57 record that we all hope to forget very, very soon. All right. Question number 2. It is, what do they do with Bruce Brown and Gary Trent Jr.? What is the plan here with these guys? Because there's a lot of different optionality here. They can go a bunch of different ways with it. And I think, there are pros and cons to all of them. But basically, it boils down to, I think, 3 options. Option 1, you renounce them both, pursue the cap space route, try to go sign some free agents. We'll get into that. Option 2 is keep them both, remain an over-the-cap team, keep your mid-level exception available, and go into next season with those 2 guys as role players on it, the Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett-led basketball team, of which there were some pretty interesting returns in the very brief time they had together following the settling of the team and the end of the transaction window and all that stuff before Scotty got hurt. And option 3 is like split the difference. You keep Gary, maybe sign him to a reasonable contract, trade Bruce Brown before his guarantee date on the 29th. Maybe you let Gary walk and keep Bruce as a trade piece going into the season. Lots of optionality there as well. Let's go to the cap space route, though, because I think this one, it's not quite as exciting as I thought it might be when the Raptors cleared the decks at the deadline. And I was pissed off about the Pascal trade. I was unhappy with the way the things had gone. But, the reason to look forward to things was, wow, okay, they've kind of cleared the decks here. They've taken care of their financial obstacles, and they have some money to play with this summer. Of course, they signed Kelly Olynyk. That's a perfectly fine piece of business to me. He's looked very good. I think he's going to look even better with better players playing around him and not, the humps from the G League. All due respect to those humps. But, look, by NBA standards, the Raptors were not rolling out a very high-end roster around Kelly Olynyk down the stretch. And so who are you going to target with that salary cap space? We've talked about Malik Monk. Do you throw the full amount at him, right? That's probably what it's going to take. He might win Sixth Man of the Year. He's a very good playmaker all of a sudden. He's 26 years old, right in the prime of his career. He's going to get the bag, and the Raptors might not even have the full amount of bag that Malik Monk would need. If they don't, if they keep the pick and they hang on to Bruce, or even they renounce Bruce and Gary, but keep the pick, they're only at about $22 million in space. Like, that's a tough thing to can you find a contract for Malik Monk with that amount of money? Probably not. Then you're kind of going down the tiers of free agents, and man, it's a grim free agent scene this offseason. You got Caleb Martin. He's fine. He's decent. He's had some moments for sure for the Heat. He's been like one of the better players for the Heat in a playoff series before, but do you trust that the Heat pixie dust doesn't just kind of fall off when you leave Miami? I don't totally trust it. It's a tough one for me to stomach. It kind of, to me, feels a little Damari Carroll-y, where like a guy makes a lot of sense within the context of a certain team. You give him a lot of money and maybe it just doesn't quite fit. Although Caleb Martin probably is the best wing option out there for the free agent route, at least. So there's that. You're going to give Tobias Harris his next huge contract? Probably not. Maybe some interesting thoughts there if you want to slide him in as like a 4 or a 3 on the team with some shooting, but I think the defense would really struggle there. I don't think you're paying Buddy Hield. I don't think you're paying Klay Thompson. There's just like not a lot of interesting free agents at the top of the market. You're not going to have enough money, like I said earlier, to go after like a Paul George or something like that either. Tyus Jones could be interesting if he wants to go back to being a full-time backup in exchange for some money. Maybe that's unlikely. He obviously wanted to be a starter. That was kind of the impetus, I think, for the trade to the Wizards. The Grizzlies did him a solid. Does he become a starter somewhere else? I don't know if Tyus Jones is quite that good a player. Maybe he has to take a high-end backup role, and he'd be a nice backup to have for sure. Extra guard play never hurt anybody. And if you're losing Bruce Brown in this hypothetical cap space scenario, replacing him with Tyus Jones to have that guard depth would be a pretty decent way to do it. But it's not perfect. And, it's maybe not the best use of a pretty substantial salary slot if you're going to go give Tyus Jones $20 million a year or whatever it's going to take to get him. That's kind of are interesting. DeAnthony Melton's sort of interesting to me, although the back issues he's dealing with this season are a little bit troubling. Look, the free agent route is iffy at best, and you might, I think the ultimate thing is like if you're going to move on from Bruce Brown and Gary Trent Jr. to fill in those spots, you got to fill those 2 spots with upgrades on Bruce Brown and Gary Trent Jr. Otherwise, you're moving backwards and locking yourselves into contracts that are not all that favorable, probably longer term deals, whatever. I think you got to make sure you're getting improvements on Bruce and Gary, and looking at the landscape, I'm not sure that you're actually going to do that, which brings you to option 2, which is keep them both. They remain an over the cap team. They have their mid-level exception to play with. They basically go into next season with a similar rotation to what they had before everything kind of fell apart this year, where you have like that top 9 of Quickly, Trent, Barnes, Barrett, Pirtle, Dick, Olynyk, Brown, and am I missing somebody? I think I'm missing somebody. Ochai Agbaji. That was the 9-man group they had there before things, all fell apart, and they were showing some pretty decent stuff. You basically go in with that group plus your 3 first-round picks you get this year. Maybe you bring back a Javon Freeman-Liberty, and then maybe you bring in a mid-level exception guy, and basically that's your team. Maybe that's the way you do it. Like, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think there were some pretty encouraging signs there with that group. And maybe that's the sort of marinate plan where you just kind of let things simmer a little bit longer, see what's there in more than a 10-game sample than you actually got to see that team in. I don't think I dislike that one. I think I prefer that to the free agency route at this point, honestly. And then there's the third option, which is you find a way to kind of split the difference. Maybe you keep Gary Trent Jr. around, but use Bruce Brown before his guarantee date on June the 29th for a trade. The whether this is the route to go ultimately depends on what can you get for Bruce Brown in a trade, right? Like, can you get like a wing upgrade with him as the salary going out, add a pick or 2? Obviously, this depends a little bit on what happens with the draft pick. Do you have picks to play with in this draft that you're sending over to somebody? Is it picks in future drafts? Do you have picks in future drafts available? It's all a big mess until we figure out the situation with this draft pick. But I think there's something there with the Bruce Brown thing. I think the Bruce Brown trade probably is something like, a team washes out in the playoffs, is looking at being very expensive and needs to shed some money. Maybe this also requires you renounce Gary Trent Jr. So you have a little bit of cap space to work with Bruce Brown in there. Kind of bring back a bigger salary in exchange for Bruce Brown. Like, those machinations are stuff that are above me and stuff that the front office can figure out. But I think there's some sort of interesting pathways if you keep one of Gary or Bruce and or renounce one and trade the other. I don't think it has to be that you just kind of renounce them both or decline them both and have them not on the team at all. Like, you can use one of them for trade stuff, Bruce being the one, but that one I think is it's so much more amorphous. It's so much more dependent on what actually happens in the playoffs. And I think that's a hard one to sort of have a strong opinion on right now, because I don't know what the realistic options would look like with Bruce Brown as the outgoing piece plus picks attached to him. Maybe use Chris Boucher's contract as well to juice up the salary going out if you need to. There's some interesting stuff there. I don't quite know yet, and I think no one's really going to know what the trade landscape looks like until after the postseason dust settles and we see which teams are upset and sad and angry and itching for a trade, and other teams are happy, and which teams are kind of moving forward with their group. It's interesting. So those are kind of three options as of right now. I think my preferred option is to just keep both of them and figure it out. The trade thing is interesting. We'll get into the trade thing coming up, actually, in just 1 second in a little bit more depth. As who would they even target? What is the move there? Is it time for a big swing? Is it too early for a big swing? We'll get to that coming up in just 1 sec. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Monopoly Go. And look, man, I've been telling you about Monopoly Go for 1 day now, and it should be enough to get you on board, because Monopoly Go is super duper fun, especially if you're someone like me who loves Monopoly Classic on the board. You love tormenting your family and friends. You love ruining game night by being a tyrant at Monopoly. I sure do, and I would love to do that with my friends in mobile game form. You can do it right now with Monopoly Go. I'm sure you heard of it by now. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly where you can play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is, of course, messing with your friends. It's why you play fantasy sports. It's why you do anything with your friends. It's to mess with them, right? You can charge them rent for your iconic properties, just like classic Monopoly. You can now also rob their vaults of riches for yourself, and the leaderboards show who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is, so you can have those bragging rights over your friends, which is ultimately all we really want in life. But it's not just your competitive side that loves it. You can team up with your friends and people all around the world in timed tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get into the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go for free on the App Store or on Google Play. All right, we continue on here, rounding out your show, taking a look at the biggest questions facing your Toronto Raptors this offseason. There are other questions beyond the ones we'll cover today, of course, but these are the three I've deemed to be the biggest / most interesting, I think. Just a reminder, of course, you can find Locked On Sports Today 24/7 over on YouTube. It's our all-day streaming channel, and today you can go check out the crossover episodes previewing tonight's play-in game. So go do that. I think it's both Western Conference games, right? You got Lakers, Pelicans, you got Warriors, Kings. Excuse me. They're all available for you over on Locked On Sports Today. Go check it out. It's easy, free. It's there all day for you to stream while you work and don't want to do other things. All right, let's get to it. The last question I have is sort of my big overarching questions for the offseason. And this ties into the just general philosophy of the front office. And again, is probably very much tied to what happens with the draft pick. But is it time for a swing to kind of accelerate this thing? Do they go and try to fill, I think, the very clear hole on the wing with this team, where you try to move RJ Barrett more to the 2, you have Scotty Barnes being your 4, and you try to find a 3 who brings some defensive punch, who can shoot, maybe make a little bit of extra, work with the ball in his hands, maybe some extra creation that's never hurt anybody or anything like that. Like, you can have all sorts of interesting players fill that role. And I think it's just like a pretty glaring, obvious need. Maybe Grady Dick becomes that guy. Maybe RJ Barrett levels up his defense and you go forward with a quickly Dick, Barrett, Barnes, Pirtle starting 5 of the future that makes sense, that has enough defensive punch. I'm not there yet with RJ Barrett's defense. And I think Grady Dick probably needs a couple more years to, just kind of build up and become a more refined and solid player before he's really ready for starting duty on a competitive team. And so I do think there's a real chance the Raptors do the thing, which is the thing they often do, is kick tires on big swings. We know they're always poking around. We know the Lillard stuff last summer was extremely real. Bobby Webster confirmed as much on media day when he said they had their biggest offer ever for a player on the table in those talks for Damian Lillard. Masai Ujiri's remarked this season upon not having the patience for a full-scale, long-term, prolonged rebuild. And they already have some pretty interesting foundational pieces in place with Emmanuel Quickley, Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett. Bobby Marks in his, offseason preview for the Raptors pointed out like they're kind of in a similar spot to where the Pacers were a couple of years ago when they just brought in Tyrese Halliburton. They drafted high. I think they got Ben Mathurin in that draft, and then they kind of hit the accelerate button pretty quickly. We know what they've done with Pascal Siakam this year as well. And so if that's where the Raptors kind of are, where they don't need this long-term rebuild to get talent, they have interesting talent on hand. They have a potential best player on a good team in Scotty Barnes on hand. They certainly believe he's that. Then I do think there's a case for, why wait around? Let's go get another guy to run with this group, and let's be serious next season. I think that is a possibility. I think it's similar to what the Cavs did, right, with Donovan Mitchell, where they had Evan Mobley. They thought very highly of him. They had Darius Garland and Jarrett Allen in there as well. And they said, you know what? We got a pretty good thing going here. Let's add to that. Let's double down on this pretty good thing and let's be a really good thing. And so I think that's very much on the table for the Raptors this offseason. Of course, it very much depends again on the draft pick. Are they going to have all their future picks and swaps unencumbered? Are they going to have extra picks in this draft to play with, right? If they jump up into the top 4, maybe that becomes a trade chip for a big swing of a trade. I think an interesting subplot of this offseason is, the trade market, right? Teams are going to wash out of the playoffs. There are more teams that are going to be disappointed than are spots in deep playoff rounds. And so, does a team start to say, you know what, like we're going to get expensive. We got to shake things up here. A way we could do that is to add a cost-controlled guy with a high pick from the Raptors. Maybe we send this big, defensively talented wing over, and maybe that's our way of sort of reshuffling the decks and prolonging our window while the Raptors say, hey, like let's kickstart our window here and get someone in the door who's ready to run with Scotty Barnes right now. They've got the couple extra picks from the Pacers trade. They have this year's Pacers pick, which will be anywhere between 16 and 19, pending the results of many coin flips later on. Of course, they've got the Pacers pick in 2026 as well. If they convey this pick this year, all of their future picks and swaps become available and unencumbered. So they'll have some stuff to work with. Maybe not as much as the Thunder or the Jazz or some of these teams that are hoarding picks, but we know that these teams also are in different states of their cycle. The Thunder, we know, are very patient and don't love to go and splurge and are also a contender now. So maybe they just hold fast. The Jazz seem like maybe they're a little bit further away from being a team that's in consideration for big star swings. The Rockets are out there. The Spurs are out there, sure. But, you never know. Certain things happen and teams have different situations, and not every player that becomes available makes sense for every team out there that has a horde of picks to go and trade. And so it's going to be fascinating. I think the playoffs are going to leave a lot of teams feeling disappointment. The second apron is going to make teams think twice about getting super expensive if they're not going on deep playoff runs. And I think there are a few guys that come to mind as like, okay, like keep an eye on these names. I think Mikal Bridges, I've mentioned him before. Maybe the Nets come to Jesus and realize they're going nowhere fast and decide to actually move on from him in a way they felt reticent to do at this year's deadline, per all the reporting from the Rockets and what the Rockets were offering there. Do the Pelicans wash out? And I know I've mentioned like Herb Jones and Trey Murphy before, but I'm kind of coming around on if the Pelicans like don't make it out of the play-in, if they lose in the first round in, embarrassing fashion to the Nuggets or whatever, like what happens there? Do they look at, Brandon Ingram's an expiring contract coming up. Are we going to really pay him his next contract when we have Zion, we have Trey Murphy to pay, we have Herb Jones? We got a lot of really young and interesting players kind of filling in the back of our rotation that maybe deserve some time. Does Brandon Ingram become a guy that they trade? And, I was thinking about this last night, kicking it around in the Discord. I think Brandon Ingram's a really interesting name for the Raptors. If he does become available, it would be a risk. He'd be going into the last year of his deal. But as we've seen, free agency's kind of dead. And the best way for players to get paid is by the teams that currently employ them. If you can be the team that's currently employing Brandon Ingram going into next summer, you have the inside track of keeping him. You have the inside track of selling him on a Quickley, Barrett, Barnes, Ingram, Pirtle-led team that's pretty damn interesting. That's a name to watch. I'm probably going to talk about Brandon Ingram a lot more this summer, depending on what the Pelicans do. And I'm a big believer in the Pelicans. I'm rooting for the Pelicans to do well, but if they don't, and they're in a tough spot to do well considering their seeding situation, I think that becomes a really fascinating name. Of course, there's Jaden McDaniels on the Wolves with all the ownership strife there. Do they get a little worried about paying him? What's the deal there? He's already locked into a deal. They have buyer's remorse there. Does Glenn Taylor not actually serve as the white knight saving the Timberwolves from the cheapness of Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lowry? And do they make some moves to cut salary? If they wash out, if they lose to the Suns in the first round, things could get weird there. We'll see. Towns is obviously the main guy you'd look at moving there, but I don't think anything's off the table if the Timberwolves crash out in the first round. Jeremy Grant, anyone? He's not sexy. He makes a lot of money, but he'd fit pretty damn nicely on this Raptors team. That's a guy to watch out in Portland. And hey, man, the Bucks crash out in round one. Does the Giannis noise perk up again? I do think the playoffs are going to shake some guys loose. Probably not all of these guys, maybe one or two of these guys at most, but I do think there will be some interesting things to kind of consider if teams wash out in the playoffs and they're unhappy. And the Raptors are sitting there with a massive need on the wing, and some teams got some wings to spare potentially. It's fascinating. It's hard to make a big swing based on where the team sits pick-wise. I do think it could make some sense with that Bruce Brown salary. You've got that big salary to include just to match. You have Chris Boucher's, expiring deal as well. I think Brown plus Boucher actually equals a one Brandon Ingram salary-wise. It's just food for thought. But yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm at. If they can find a deal, I think there's a deal to be made this summer to accelerate this thing for the Raptors. Obviously, it's got to be the right deal. You can't go and just force a deal for a not so good player just because you need wings. That's when you fall back to the Bruce Brown and Gary Trent Jr. sticking around option. But there's going to be some names out there. There's going to be some pissed off teams after the playoffs. And the Raptors, I think, are in a pretty good spot to go and take advantage of that if they so desire and if their draft pick situation allows for it, depending on what teams want, what they feel like they want to put into an offer, et cetera, et cetera. All right, that's going to do it. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will obviously keep track of these storylines all throughout the offseason. We got Katie Heindel back on the pod tomorrow for some more offseason talk. We've got the winner of the Locked On Raptors Fantasy League coming up on Thursday. That'll be a fun episode. And, of course, we have Richard Stamen of Locked On NBA Big Board on Friday to talk some draft prospects. Loaded week for you. This is the time of year where the show is going to come into its own, man. We're not talking about garbage basketball anymore. We're talking about transactions and offseason theoretical roster building. It's going to be a blast. Excited to do that for the next couple of months here, especially for the next month before the draft lottery. We finally know what the hell's going on here. But either way, thanks so much for tuning in, supporting the show, rocking with it every single day. Please follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend, go to the YouTube, subscribe over there, and we will talk to you again on Wednesday with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye.